The word democracy comes from the Greek words of demos, which means people, and kratos, which means power or rule. So democracy basically means the rule of the people. Democracy first started as a direct democracy in Greek cities, notably ancient Athens, where people came together to speak about their concerns and opinions in front of rulers of the city-state, and directly voted on new rules and laws. Here is considered as the birthplace of democracy. For the very first time, decisions were made by the people instead of rulers. But sadly, the ancient Greeks did not see all people equally. Slaves, women, children, and the people who did not have a land weren't allowed to vote. This is what we call a flawed democracy today. After the Greeks lost their power and influence in the 1st century AD, their early forms of democracy were also fading away until the Magna Carta was signed in 1215. Which prevented the King of England to do whatever he wanted and said that even the king had to follow the country's rules and laws which were written in the Constitution. Today, most democracies are indirect or representative, which means that you can't vote for a new law yourself, but you can vote for people who then become lawmakers and present your interests. But democracy isn't just about voting. It's about everything to protect the best interests of the people, no matter what is their race, gender, political opinion, or religion. These interests can be human rights, quality of life, infrastructure, and many more. Modern democracies divide power into 3 different branches: the legislative, the people who make the law; the executive, the people who make sure that you obey the law; and the judiciary, who judge you if you commit a crime. These 3 are independent and work following the process, checks and balances, which means all the work must be clear and fair. And very important, the people who have power also must follow the law and not exceed their authority. In addition, a democratic government must work in a way that reflects the wish, feeling, desire, and values of the society that it governs. This is also known as the general will, which is a concept developed by the famous Swiss philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. One of the problems of democratic voting is that the biggest groups of people always have the most power, and that's why a good democracy also has laws to protect the rights of its smaller and weaker groups. A democracy where the majority chooses to separate, expel, or injure its minority is not a functioning democracy. So, what do you think now about democracy? Winston Churchill once said, "Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time." Do you agree?
People often insist that democracy is the way to do things, that all other forms of government are inherently inferior, that democracy is good without question. But we have questions. What's so good about democracy? Should we be happy that we live in a democracy? In Canada, our government is a democratic one. Ideally, each voter has an equal say about who should be elected to represent us in government. Our representatives make laws that tell us what we can't do, can do, and must do. Democracy is a system of government that, at least in principle, is controlled by and benefits all people equally. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But it's not just about free elections. In order for elections to work, the best democracies also put a pretty high value on principles like equality and freedom. Equality means that your government shouldn't treat you any better or any worse based on the color of your skin, your gender, where you come from, your abilities, your faith, or what you believe. Having freedom in a democracy means having the right to speak up. It also means the government won't tell you who you can and cannot hang out with, among other things. Living in a democracy also means that the people who make the laws don't interpret them. Citizens can use the court system to ensure these rights and freedoms are upheld. For example, in Canada, our courts were one of the first in the world to rule in favor of giving gay and lesbian couples the legal right to get married, which straight couples have always had. Sounds pretty good so far, right? Not so fast. It is entirely possible to elect leaders who govern poorly and take these freedoms away from us. Like Hitler's Nazi Party, they gained power by winning an election. One of the first things they did after winning was to suspend democracy and give Hitler the powers of a dictator. We all know how that worked out. On the other hand, the Nobel Peace Prize winning Dalai Lama is generally considered a wise and compassionate world leader. that he was technically a dictator. He came to power when he was declared the head of government for Tibet shortly after he was born. But these are rare and complicated examples. On the whole, dictatorships are often characterized by inequality, centralized state power, and enforcement of rules by violent force. Democracy allows the goals of a society to be determined by a vote of free citizens, and as the opinions and knowledge of citizens change with a changing world. If a democratically elected leader turns out to be a bit of a lemon, then the people can remove him from power without having to resort to the often bloody instability of revolution. So, democracy has a built-in repair mechanism. We can all think of flaws with democracy. What about the minority voice? In a democracy, don't politicians appeal to public ignorance and fear? What if people don't show up to vote? You might say that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all those other forms that have been tried. That's a little bit cynical. For democracy to keep working, we've got to keep making democracy better. Before we can do that, we want to make sure that everybody understands how it works right now. So stay tuned.